and he was reacting to some of the answers that his attorney was telling him. The judge did come into the courtroom, and at that point, we started the first hearing. That was looking at the charges specifically to
Kimberly, we just want to interrupt you for a second because we are now seeing the suspect walked out of that helicopter. This is at the Wall Street heliport. He is surrounded by many, many officers. He is shackled, his hands in front of him. He is in that orange jumpsuit that he was probably given in Pennsylvania. He is looking straight ahead. There is no real expression now looking down as he's moving very slowly. And we understand that the mayor is at the heliport. He will be talking in any moment now about the arrival of the suspect who will be facing federal charges this afternoon. One count, first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism. That is a count that could bring with it the death penalty because first-degree murder in New York, which is another charge he will be facing, does not bring the death penalty.
And if you look closely, you can see Mayor Adams is part of this entourage of law enforcement that is surrounding what was the center of a national manhunt just days ago. Was until December 9th that he was tracked down to Pennsylvania after that 5-day manhunt and eventually spotted by somebody who said he looked like the person that they were looking for in the surveillance video. And now we are at this situation, and he is about to be brought to Lower Manhattan. I'll continue to follow the very latest on this. And, of course, he'll be fingerprinted and arraigned and then presumably brought to Rikers. Let's go back to Kimberly, who's in Pennsylvania for us. And Kimberly, tell me a little bit about how quickly they moved him out of the court proceeding and what happened during the move to bring him back to New York.
Yeah, Dave, it was interesting in the courtroom. As I was saying, he was very engaged with his attorney, very alert, very focused, seemed to really want to know what the paperwork is. What does it say? What am I signing? Then came the big awkward moment. The attorneys and the prosecutors went in the back room and closed door to talk with the judge. That started what ended up being a roughly hour-long situation where Mangione, for most of that, was sitting by himself, kind of looking at the paperwork. It's a relatively small courtroom. He was reading the paperwork. At one point, there were about a dozen NYPD officers front and center in that courtroom, just a mere feet from Mangione. At one point, he glanced around, turned around. He was sitting down. He looked at them, and then a few minutes later, he locked eyes with one specific officer, and it was sort of like a stare down. It was very tense. Nothing was being said. We were just waiting for this closed-door meeting to wrap up. He was looking around the courtroom, checking out the media, watching us. He was kind of shifting in his seat. Finally, after this hour-long break, another judge came in for the second part of the hearing, which did focus on just what is happening now, what we're seeing in New York City, the extradition. They came out, that part as well. They went over the order, some housekeeping notes with that extradition, and at that point, it was pretty quick. He was out of there, let out of the courthouse. His demeanor in that courtroom, it was very interesting. He seemed cool as a cucumber. He wasn't nervous. He was looking at us. He almost, I would say, kind of smug, but again, engaged. And then at one point later on in the afternoon, after the hearing wrapped, we actually learned what that hour delay was because no one knew. We thought these were going to be 8:30 a.m. hearings followed by the 9 a.m. hearing. Pretty quick. Apparently, there was some paperwork in the back there was a hiccup with that Mangione didn't want to sign. It stated that he had essentially been treated nicely by police officers at all times. So I guess there was some haggling between prosecutors, his defense attorney. Ultimately, he did sign that first paperwork, hence the extradition. Outside of the courthouse, again, like we've seen in New York City since this horrific crime, a small group of supporters chanting, "Free him, free him." But again, once he left this courthouse and headed to the airport and then to New York City, things quieted down and again shifted. The main focus now to you guys back in New York City.
Kimberly, we did just see the suspect. Thanks so much for some of that insight and color about what happened this morning. We did just see the suspect moved into basically a prisoner black prisoner van, which had, you could see there was a big door within the door that locks. He was brought inside that, and that has already left the heliport area. We understand that Mayor Adams, who has been quite vocal about this case and talking about how he wanted to ensure that New York was safe, and this sort of thing was obviously not tolerated. He's at the heliport. He is joined by Jessica Tisch, the police commissioner. We understand that he will be talking. We are hoping to hear from him shortly, and it's so unusual to see a mayor and a police commissioner meeting a suspect who's been extradited from another state here to face charges, now federal charges as well, on a crime committed here in New York City. Here's the mayor. Let's listen in.
I want to send a very clear and loud message that this act of terrorism and the violence that stems from it is something that would not be tolerated in the city. We wanted to personally be here to show the symbolism of leading from the front. The apprehension, some of these detectives will finally sleep tonight after this person has been brought to justice here in New York City. We want to thank our partners and the other jurisdictions that played a vital role in this apprehension, particularly the McDonald's employee who saw something and did something, notifying the proper authorities. And I will say this over and over again. The radicalization that is taking place across our country, we cannot ignore. When you see an incident that took place on our streets, when you witness a shooting that took place on a school campus by now a young girl, it is the continuation of our young people are crying out for help. And we have an obligation not only to make apprehensions after an incident of this magnitude, but to do far more to prevent it. We'll open a few questions.
Time for a few questions. Dean, go first.
Dean, Mr. Mayor, what does this mean for the investigation that he's back in New York?
Commissioner?
He will be arraigned today on his indictment for the killing of Brian Thompson, CEO of UnitedHealthcare, and he'll be arraigned in federal court.
Any other questions?
What do you want to say, Mayor, about the supporters of Luigi, wearing Luigi costumes, supporters of Luigi across the country?
The beauty of this country is that you have the right to protest the right. And those who are protesting when someone used violence to solve a problem, we saw that on the school ground as well. It sends the wrong message. A person that uses a gun to solve a concern, if it's on a school campus or on our streets, there are mechanisms in this country on how to organize on those issues of concern. We saw young people who were tired of shootings on school ground. They organized and pushed Congress to do weapon bans. That is how we do it here. We don't use a gun. And anyone that celebrates that, it is vile and it is sending the wrong message, and you're celebrating using violence to solve an issue.
Now, what's his next stop? What's his next stop? Where's he going to be?
What's his next stop?
His next stop, he's going to be taken to the federal building at 290 Broadway for processing by the FBI and the NYPD.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
You have been listening to Mayor Adams there, flanked by NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch, talking about the extradition of the suspect, Luigi Mangione, back to New York for the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. The mayor saying he wants to send a clear message. This act of terrorism will not be tolerated.
Also adding that you cannot celebrate violence being used to solve problems. That is absolutely unacceptable. And he mentioned all of the police work that went into tracking down the suspect, all of the surveillance cameras that followed his steps through New York City. He said that the mayor saying some of the detectives will finally be able to sleep tonight. And he shouted out the young employee at the McDonald's who overheard other customers believing that that could possibly be the suspect eating at that McDonald's in Pennsylvania, and called the authorities.
And look at his face, barely any reaction to what he faces. He's now added federal charges to the local charges here in this shooting, and he's heading to the federal building in Lower Manhattan. And then he is also scheduled to be an arraignment and fingerprinted at the Lower Manhattan 100 Center Street, where our Janice Yu has been reporting and will continue throughout the day at ABC 7 NY. And we'll have another report at Eyewitness News first of 4.